For as long as I can remember, there's been division between rugby and football. More specifically, rugby and football fans. There's always been animosity between the two sets of fans, and it seems to come down to the attitudes that each supporters have towards the other. This idea that rugby fans are only there for the day out and have a complete lack of atmosphere at games, and that football fans are violent hooligans that cause trouble everywhere they go. In this programme, I'm going to have a look at what I believe is the root of the matter: social class. Now, it may not be as black and white as football is working class and rugby is middle class, so we're going to explore this a little deeper. In 2015, researcher Stacey Pope carried out a study in which she interviewed 85 female rugby and football fans. What she wanted to prove is that the two sports offer a platform for people to freely talk about social class, and that there is a social class difference between the fans of each sport that is there to be talked about. Her research showed that the majority of fans agreed there is a social class difference, and that there are some stereotypes surrounding how one set of fans views the other. Pope asked rugby fans their thoughts on football fans, and football fans their thoughts on rugby fans, to see what these stereotypes were. I am going to carry out similar interviews with rugby and football fans in Scotland to try and understand the social class difference a bit more. Before I started on my journey to find out how rugby fans and football fans felt about each other, I decided to go back in time with a very brief social history of both sports, so that I might understand the social class backgrounds a little bit better. In 1823, in a town called Rugby, an English schoolboy named William Webb Ellis allegedly picked up the ball during a game of football and ran with it, thus creating the game of rugby. It soon became a very popular thing, and 1871 saw the creation of rugby's governing body, the RFU, Rugby Football Union. In those days there were two kinds of players: amateurs and professionals. The amateurs were comprised of public schoolboys or people rich enough to be able to play the game without being paid. Most of these amateurs came from the south of England. The professionals, on the other hand, were mostly poor working class northerners from Lancashire and Yorkshire, who had so little income that they needed to be paid for missing work to play rugby. A stark contrast to today, where professional rugby players earn hundreds of thousands of pounds a year. The professionals started to form fully professional teams after realising that being paid to play was ideal. This made the RFU unhappy, as the working class northerners were beating the southern amateurs at their own game, and getting paid to do so. So the RFU banned professionals and professional teams. This just led the professionals to start their own league in 1895 called the Northern Rugby Football Union, which would later be renamed Rugby League. The RFU then named their sport Rugby Union. So it turns out that there was serious division within the sport of rugby, even before the division between rugby and football. So where does this leave football? It was around 1850 to 1890 that the game of football began its gradual introduction to the working class. 1863 saw the establishment of the Football Association by ex-public schoolboys. Soon after, in 1871, the FA Cup was created. The very first team to win the FA Cup was the Wanderers, a team that included 4 Harrow graduates, 3 Old Etonians, and players from Westminster, Oxford and Cambridge. At this point it seemed a game for the ruling class, quite the opposite from the direction the game would soon head in. It wasn't until 1889 that the working class made its first major impact on the game, after its rapid growth throughout the North and the Midlands in 1870. Blackburn Olympic, a team from Lancashire, consisting of weavers, plumbers and foundry workers, challenged the Wanderers and beat them in the FA Cup final. In 1885, professionalism in football was then legalised. This was a result of Preston North End being expelled by the FA for fielding professional players. Preston received the backing of 40 other Midland and Northern teams, and together they threatened to create a new FA. From then on, football was a working class game. The first stop of my journey was Millbrae, home of Ayr Rugby Club. They were playing Hawick in a game that could be their last in the BT Premiership. It seemed an appropriate place to start, being a humble, community-driven club, where tradition and the love of a wee dram were not hard to come by. A perfect place to see how different the attitudes towards the two sports are. There was a lot going on, even a couple of hours before the match was due to start. So as the team went through their training routine, I caught up with sports journalist Ron Evans and Matthew Vallance, a sports writer for The Scotsman. Do you feel that the atmosphere at a game like this differs from that to a football game?
Yes, very much so. I mean, you look at the day we've got here, you look at people around, sitting outside, having a burger, kids playing around. It's quite different from the atmosphere where you just turn up for the game. And it's great to see.
So you don't think you would get this at the football? You think football's got a more hostile environment?
No, not at all. Just the logistics of it. You turn up, you go into the ground, you go to your seat, you sit down, that's the game. Here, it's a more social approach, more social atmosphere. Maybe I'm doing injustice to some football clubs, but in the main, I think you'll find this is more likely to happen in a rugby match than a football match.
So do you think there's a difference between the mentality of rugby fans and football fans?
Not at all. You're going to have Howick people here today who are every bit as vociferous, and Ayr fans here today who are every bit as vociferous as football fans, whether it's football fans at Ibrox and Parkhead or down the road at Auchinleck Talbot.
Do you think the atmosphere a game like this with this kind of sport differs from the atmosphere you'd get at a football match?
Oh yes, there's the commitment is as complete from the spectators, but it's nicer. I mean, most of the fans here have actually played the game, played for the whatever clubs are playing. They have a greater commitment, I think, than the football fan has. Football has tried for years to build a fan base that you come to football because it's there. People come to rugby because it's different, because they've played the game at school, they've played the game at the club, they're there to watch friends. There's far more of that, I feel, in rugby. You know, they know the players more than the football fans know the footballers. You know, these guys are friends. And you see it. You see particularly with the top players. I mean, they won't be here today, but when the likes of Finn Russell and Ali Price are here, they're standing there and they're talking to other kids. They're far more engaged than top footballers are.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome to Millbrae for this, which could be our last home game, certainly in the BB Championship for 2017-18. Today we welcome Hoyt, and we are hoping to avenge last week's cup defeat down there. A special welcome goes out to the Hoyt President, John Thorburn, his committee and supporters.
As the teams came out for a quick warm-up, I caught up with a couple of Ayr fans to ask them if they think there is a difference between football fans and rugby fans.
Absolutely. There's always been a difference. There's always been a difference. I wouldn't say it's because the football supporters are a bit more uncouth, but somehow I think there's too much alcohol and there's too much sectarianism in football. You don't get any sectarianism in rugby, you know. People gravitate from rugby, school rugby, into adult rugby, so they tend to be schools that play rugby, and they're not your average school.
When they go to the game, they seem to lose it. They go daft and swearing and shouting. I've never felt like that. Have you, about rugby? I've never lost the place. Well, watch it and enjoy it. And occasionally, I would get excited, but not very often. Maybe that's what's wrong. You do what you're told in the rugby pitch. You do what you're told and accept what he says.
It was time for a change of scenery and a change of atmosphere. My next destination was Falkirk, a large town whose football team, Falkirk Football Club, had been struggling as of late. As I passed the famous Kelpies, I knew I was getting close, and I was interested to hear what the football fans had to say. I had arranged to speak with Brian and Kirsty, a father-daughter duo who go to see Falkirk every week.
The difference between rugby fans and football fans, well, the difference is that football fans didn't tolerate themselves as well as rugby fans. Rugby fans, you can go and you can mix with them. Football fans, it's very tribal. So you can go to a rugby match, you can have a beer, and you can socialise with them. But it's just not happens in football. For some reason, it's a totally different culture.
Do you think it's a totally different culture because of a social class difference?
I think there's probably a bit of that. But just football's always been that way, and my experience in my life. So it's just cultural.
Unfortunately, we couldn't get any footage of our time with Kirsty due to the high winds which were buffeting our equipment. So with that, it was on to our next stop. I travelled to Paisley to see St Mirren take on Brechin City at the Paisley 2021 Stadium. I was hoping for a different experience here, as St Mirren have a group of more hardcore fans that try to create a better atmosphere from their North Bank stand. The St Mirren players were warming up as I made my way around to where the North Bank fans were setting up their display for the game. Josh McGuinness, a coordinator of the North Bank, kindly agreed to talk to me, so I asked him his thoughts on rugby fans.
Typical rugby fan, bigger bloke, drinking a beer, stupid hats on, things like that, aye. A lot of, we've been through in Edinburgh, going through to Hibs etc, and you see people out for the rugby and they're dressed a lot better than which people would be at the football.
After a close game, I headed out to the front of the main stand to talk to some more supporters, some of who were in good spirits. What did you think about the atmosphere of that game?
Amazing. Yeah.
Enjoy the fans in the corner with the flags.
Yeah. Good.
They add to the game. They make
Yeah.
it better for everyone.
Yeah.
Enjoy the game.
Yeah. Absolutely. Good goal. Yeah. Good goal. Free kick. Absolute peach.
The rugby fans seem to be a bit more posh than the football fans. Say it's a gentleman's sport played by hooligans about football, and a hooligan sport played by gentlemen for the rugby. So,
as I left the Paisley 2021 Stadium, I couldn't help but feel that fans such as the North Bank supporters are unfairly labelled as being hostile and unruly. It seemed to me they were just trying to create a better atmosphere. For a more expert opinion, I went to BBC Scotland to talk to their chief sports writer, Tom English. Having been a journalist covering both rugby and football in Scotland since 2005, I was hoping he could give me some well-balanced and well-informed views. How would you describe the difference between the atmosphere at a rugby game compared to a football game?
Well, it depends on what football game and what rugby game, for a start. They're not all the same. I would say an international match or a big game, Champions League game or a Champions Cup game in rugby. The atmosphere at, generally speaking, and I don't like talking in generalisms, but anyway, the rugby match would be probably less confrontational, not as loud enough, but not as loud. I think it's a bit of a cliche now to say that the whole tribal thing, yes, you get it in Rangers and Celtic matches, Hearts Hibs matches for sure, but I think you get it less and less. And in rugby is more kind of convivial. There's less aggression. Football people would say that's because there's less passion, there's less on the line, that football people care more about their team than rugby people do. Also, I think there is a lot of people would say that there's, football fans are kind of at each other's throats a lot, whereas rugby fans, they go out and have a drink together and bon ami and all that. I have seen, been away in Champions League trips, been away with Scotland, I have seen fantastic scenes of rival fans having a great time together. But with Scotland and Celtic and Rangers and all the rest of it, seen all that happening and have seen it constantly with rugby. I mean, that's just a big thing with rugby, that fans drink together and hang out and congratulate each other after the match. So it's the sports are very different, but I think we should guard against hard and fast interpretations of what these people are like.
With all these kind of interpretations flying around, how much of these stem from social class and kind of social background in terms of how these two sports are viewed? It's often rugby's middle class, upper class, football's working class. How much of this do you think affects the way that these fans support their teams?
Well, if you take rugby, traditionally it has been a predominantly middle class game. In a lot of countries it's been a private school game, dominated. That is changing. There was always pockets, say here in Scotland, down at the borders, there was a classless game. It didn't matter what you did or who you were. All people played rugby. Same where I'm from in Ireland, Limerick, docker to doctor played rugby. But rugby's big thing over the last 10, 15 years is to broaden out the game, to bring it into rural parishes, to bring it to grow their player base, to grow their fan base. So that domination by middle class, it's not as pronounced as it was. Equally, I think football would have been a very working class game in its roots, at its heart and its core. Very, very working class sport. I think that is changing now. You go on a Scotland trip anywhere in the world, there's 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 people. It doesn't matter where it is. They're spending a fortune to go. Celtic fans, Rangers fans, Hearts fans, Hibs fans. They spend an awful lot of money following their team around Europe. And it's not all working class people are doing that. Again, it's too simple for me to say football is working class and rugby is middle class. I think it's a bit of both. What you're getting now in rugby, it is still largely middle class, but there's a lot of other people coming in from all different backgrounds. And I can see them. I saw them in Rome this season. I saw them in Cardiff. I saw them in Dublin. All sorts of different people. Not wealthy people, some of them are wealthy for sure. And I see that in football as well. I came to Scotland in 2005 and was writing about rugby, was writing about football all the time. And I used to go and watch a report on Glasgow playing. And there might be 1,500 people there. If they were lucky, 2,000, 2,500, top whack. Now they're selling out every week at 7,500, right? It's very hard to get a ticket for Scotstoun where they play. And they're probably going to need to put in more temporary stands or bigger stands. I go to Scotstoun and I see an awful lot of football people there. An awful lot of football people. Football players, football managers. Never saw that before. Because, you know why? Because it's a good night out. It's a good night out. You can go and you can have a drink. And I think this is one of the things that football, maybe there's a touch of jealousy, I don't know, where you can go and have a beer at a rugby match, where the football fans are not trusted. And I think that's wrong, but they're not trusted by the government to go and have a beer at a football match because they think it'll all kick off. And they'll say, hang on a second, we're not savages. We can be trusted, rugby guys can be trusted with a beer. Why can't we be trusted? And maybe that's part of the separation or the divide, or maybe that's in football fans' heads. Hang on, they're being treated differently to us. And I don't think that's right. But I think in a football city like Glasgow, the emergence and strength of Glasgow Warriors, where they're selling more tickets now than Partick Thistle in the same city just down the road. I think that's a really interesting development, and that's not all rugby people. That's football people coming to watch as well, because I've seen them.
And I think it's because they're making an occasion of it.
They're making an occasion of it. It's a big event. There's a lot of international players playing. They can have a beer. It's a night out. It's an occasion. It's not just. I'm sure there are a lot of people there who are kind of day trippers. They'll go one week, won't go the next. But they see it as part of a night out. They're getting people through the gates, and maybe, football fans would scoff at that. I would hope not. But it's developing their own brand, it's developing their own culture. And if Glasgow lose, will it really matter to these people? Probably not. It will matter to Glasgow hardcore, but for the people who see it as an occasion, probably not. Where it will always matter. I'm convinced that football fans of their team, it will always matter more. They will feel it deeper than rugby fans do. Glasgow have cracked it, and they have done something that I didn't think possible, that they have eaten into the football supporter, and they've got some of them to cross the great divide and come and watch rugby. But rugby it's catching up. It's been quite smart in the way, out of necessity, in the way it's developing the atmosphere in the grounds and the player base, and they are very, very aware that they are seen as a private school middle class sport, and they're trying to break that down as much as possible. They'll never fully break it down because they need these private schools to supply players to them, and most of the Scotland team, or a good chunk of the Scotland team currently, would have originated from a private school, but they're trying to break that down. I think there are still a lot of barriers to break down, but I see them being broken down. This whole view that rugby people would have of football people, you know, we're better than them. You know, we respect the referee. We don't backchat to the referee. There's no aggression. We're all great blokes, and you know, we'll play the rugby and then we'll go to the pub afterwards and we'll have a pint together. All that stuff. It's kind of elements of that are true. Elements of that are myth making. But it's the same. It's the same with football. I mean, football people would look at rugby as middle class toffs, you know, egg chasers, you know, and that they would feel that their sport, football, matters more, that they feel it more, and they will look at a Scotland fan goes to Murrayfield, Scotland lose, and 10 minutes later he's forgotten about it. It doesn't matter. Whereas football fans, they would feel it for longer. It would upset their life. I mean, it would, you know, it's at their heart and soul. It would actually affect their life. I think the whole cliche of, you know, rugby is middle class and football is working class, I think it's dying.
I left the BBC feeling a bit more in the know about the matter. What Tom helped me to understand is that even though there are still social class stereotypes surrounding football and rugby, they are slowly but surely being taken apart. In order to survive as a sport, rugby has to bring up players from all social backgrounds, and as a result, more fans from the same background will follow. This may be the key to getting rid of the animosity between certain groups of rugby and football fans, and just maybe, they will begin to understand each other a little bit more.